are broadcasting. Hello, everybody.
Yes.
Welcome. We're about to start the tourism review webinar on strategies to avoid desk rejections in leading journals. We talk about tourism review, but obviously a lot of these things are applying to a lot of other places. We will have a little bit of delay to start because I know a lot of people are suffering from this wonderful system Go-To. We had something like 730 people who have registered to join us, and Gary has done some statistics. Gary, how many countries?
We have 85 countries.
Oh my God, 85 countries. How many countries do we have in the world?
Oh, I have no
Who knows
idea.
the latest statistics? This is geography. Bob is a geographer. He should know this.
203 separate economies.
Separate economies. Okay, that is that's a very interesting answer. All right. Okay, I'm just gonna give a little bit of time for people to join in. I can see that several people are struggling, and I got some messages early on. So we can have a little bit of time, and then we'll start about 5 minutes past. So in a couple of minutes, we're gonna start. We're gonna start this. In the meanwhile, thank you very much for coming along. You can play a little bit with your controls and the emojis and the reactions to say that if you are listening to us, and then you can then people are calling me and say, how can I get in? And too late. And then the other thing that you can use the chat. You can use the chat to ask questions, and then I don't know if we've said that, but Gary is probably going to summarize some of the questions with Tete, and then we'll see what we can do later on.
So just to clarify, I think you only see the questions function, not the chat. So that's where you are going to put the questions as audience. You will put all the questions in the question function tab, and then any questions you have going through the webinar, please put them in the questions, and then we will go through your questions during the webinar and after the presentation and discussions to give you some answers. Thank you all.
Perfect. Okay. So my clock is 5 minutes past, so I'd like to welcome everybody for joining us today, and it's great honor and opportunity to talk about strategies to avoid desk rejection in leading journals. We've got some of our senior editors with us, associate editors, and we've got Bob McCarthy as the guest of honor. Bob first is a very good friend, and second, he has been in academia probably for longer than all of us. He was the president of the Academy for the Study of Tourism, and also for a period of time he was editor of Tourism Management. We also have with us Luisa Andreu from Valencia. We've got Gary from Malaysia. We've got Sandra Loureiro from Portugal. We've got Tete, who is organizing that. Thanksgiving early. Thank you, Tete, for organizing all that with Gary. They are the power behind that. And then William, who is the emerald person in Malaysia. It's for them, it's midnight, and for Bob as well. And they're doing that in the middle of the night for us. Then we've got Armaki from Cyprus, and then we've got Nikos Korfiatis in Greece. People will be talking to you in a minute. So, Tete, remind me what I do. I go through the agenda in the beginning, right?
Yes. So you'll go through the statistics of the journal first, and then we'll give more introduction to the panelists.
Fantastic. So the journal is doing fantastically well. And actually, it's doing so well, I cannot sleep anymore. And now I got Tete and Daisy working with me on the desk rejections, because we are going to get more than 1,500 manuscripts this year, first manuscripts, plus those who are coming for the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth round. we're seeing more than 2,000 manuscripts. It's incredibly demanding on our time. Impact factor is 7.9. The site score is 18 point something, and we are already quite high on the site score tracker, which means that next year will be more than that. As I've said before, Tourism Review is blessed to have a very generic agenda and can publish a whole range of different things on tourism. And I don't particularly like the title of the journal, but I respect the original editors who set it up to be suitable in English, in German, and in France. And they did it in 1946, so we respect their decision. So we have a whole range of different topics, as you know, and you can see on the screen, and we publish everything about tourism. So the next slide will be about some of the statistics. This is a little bit, no, it is okay. So we've got, it is actually a little bit of all statistic because the site score now is about 18. So we've reached the site score 2024. We've reached it already in what month do we are? In November. So this will probably be about 19 in the future, and we're doing very well. The journal is on its 80 years, 80 anniversary. So we've had 80 years worth of contribution to tourism, started from 1946. The next slide. So according to the impact factor, it was the 7th journal on Tourism Review. I know that some of you are following impact factors very closely. Some of us, we think that this is one metric that you need to look at, but there are so many other interesting things. So for those of you who are really interested on what exactly the rankings, this is where the rankings are. The next one. And you can see how the journal is progressing in terms of downloads. We're observing the downloads as they're coming through. And you can see that from 2020 to 2024, we've got 50% increase on the downloads. And that also reflects the quality of the papers we publish and reflects what people are doing with the papers and they're using. Next slide. You can see the the countries that they download more, obviously China, UK, Australia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey, and you can see the top customers by downloads: Hong Kong Polytechnic University, ECB Data Center, which I have no idea where it is. Then you've got the University of Technology, Mara, you've got Griffith University, you've got Macau University of Science and Technology, you've got Bournemouth University, Surrey, Macau University of Tourism, and the last one, Universidad Berswana de Chile, I guess, and the last one is University Gadjah Mada in Indonesia, where my good friends are. And you can see how many downloads we've got. So you can go to the next slide. Again, citation factors and how many people are citing the research, and we are very pleased with that, although this is not the top metric for us. What I'm really interested in is to see how useful the journal is, but we love when people are using the journal and they're citing the journal. Next one. So you can see the different countries of authorship. Obviously, China is sending much more papers coming in, and particular universities like Sichuan, Beijing International Studies University, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and Nankai University are very prolific, and they're sending us a lot of papers. And the University of Central Florida in Rosen College is also very, very strong. I'm very glad that Bob is here because he's on the top 5 list of authors with articles that he has published in the last. He has published 6 papers with us in the last, I don't know how long, but in the last few years. Next slide. So you can see the organizations by submission, and you can see that Chinese universities are quite high on submissions, and you can see also the universities that have got accepted papers. And again, it's kind of reflected, but what you see later on is that a lot of the Chinese universities have got much lower acceptance rate because they've got a lot of rejections from the beginning for a whole range of different reasons. Next slide. So, I'm Dimitris Bouchalis, I'm the editor-in-chief of Tourism Review, and Tete and Gary are supporting very closely the Tourism Review, and they're running this webinar series together with William, who stays at the background and you cannot see him, but he stays, he's the technical person at the back. Now, Tete, would you like to introduce our panel, please?
Yes, thank you, Professor Bouchalis. So I'm going to, again, my name is Dr. Cici Lang. I am with the Kansas State University. So it's my honor today to host this webinar with Professor Bouchalis and Professor Gary Tan, sorry. So I am going to introduce the panelists, the guest of honor and panelist of today. So first, our guest of honor, Bob Maczurki, is an adjunct professor in School of Hotel and Tourism Management at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. He has been a tourism scholar since 1990. Oh, right after I was born, and spent most of his career at PolyU. Prior to academia, he worked in the Canadian tourism industry in a variety of advocacy and operational roles, including as a nature-based tour guide, ski instructor, and the executive director of an association representing the wilderness tourism sector. Professor Maczurki is the past president of the International Academy for the Study of Tourism and a fellow of the Council for Australasia University Tourism and Hospitality Education. So welcome, Professor Bob Maczurki.
Thank you.
What is the right pronunciation, Bob? MacArthur, no?
It's McKercher, yes.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so if I pronounce your name incorrectly.
Yeah, that's why we corrected on the spot, MacArthur.
Okay, so thank you. And then next, let me introduce our panelist. Our first panelist is Luisa Andrew, is a professor of marketing at the University of Valencia, Spain. She currently serves as associate editor of Tourism Review and is a member of the editorial boards of several leading tourism and hospitality journals. Over the years, she has co-chaired international conferences within the Advances in Tourism Marketing Conference Network. Her research focuses on sustainable marketing, communication, emotions, and tourist experiences, social media in destinations, and digital marketing. Since 2000, she has published extensively across social sciences, authoring around 50 papers in top-tier journals and 10 book chapters. So welcome, Professor Luisa.
Hola.
Thank you.
Next we have M. Farmaki, is assistant professor in the Department of Tourism Management and Hospitality at the Cyprus University of Technology. Her primary research interests lie in the areas of tourism planning and development, with an emphasis on sustainability and tourist behavior. Dr. Farmaki has a rich publication record, having published 70 articles in high-ranked peer-reviewed academic journals. She is also the co-editor of 8 books published by reputable publishers. Dr. Famke is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy UK and has participated as management committee member in several EU cost actions. So welcome, Dr. Anna Famke. Next, we have our next panelist is Nicholas Coffey-Artis, is a professor of data management and analytics at the Department of Informatics of the Ionian University in Corfu, Greece, and an established expert in analytics and artificial intelligence. He has held academic and advisory roles across Europe and has extensive experience leading data-driven research and applied AI projects. His research has been published widely in leading journals in information systems management, marketing, and tourism analytics. And he frequently collaborates with industry and public sector organizations on data science, statistical design, digital transformation, and AI governance. So welcome, Professor Nicholas Coffey-Artis. Last but not least, our panelist, Sandra Loureiro, is a professor in University Institution of Lisbon. She ranked among the world's top 100 scientists by Stanford University and 21st among marketing and tourism researchers. She has authored around 300 publications focusing on consumer brand relationships, brand coolness, tourism marketing, and immersive technology. Her work appears in top journals and is regularly presented at major conferences, including EMAC and ANSMAC. Professor Loureiro also reviews and serves on the editorial board of international journals and has participated in several EU-funded research projects. So welcome, Professor Sandra Loureiro.
Hello.
So that's all our guests of honor and panelists. And next we'll listen to their insights on how to get your paper not desk rejected by the top journals.
Okay, before you do that, I think we need to tell people what's going on with Tourism Review and most of the journals actually. Out of the 1,500 papers that they submitted, about 70 to 75% we desk rejected. So I desk reject most of them. Tete and Daisy desk reject a few of them. And what we find is that so far we've got a lot of people who are producing awfully a lot of research, a lot of papers, but a lot of these papers are not suitable. And I'm sure that all of you are going to talk about that, but I will ask Bob to share some of his statistics because he's doing some very interesting statistics on this thing. So what's happening right now is the system is getting awfully a lot of pressure. We are getting a lot of pressure for people who are working really hard but not very smart. And I think this is something that we need to reflect and change a little bit. So before you submit a paper to Tourism Review, make sure that it is properly done and follow all the advice so we don't desk reject it. Over to you, Chet.
Thank you, Professor Morales. So let's start with our guest of honor, Professor McKercher, and he will share his insight with us.
Thank you very much, Cece, and thank you, Dimitros, for inviting me. You know, I've been looking at professional development of academics for over 30 years. And the idea of how to get published and how not to get desk rejected is really important to me individually as a research idea, but also so critical to people's professional development and career development. And I'd like to share some findings of a study we did 17 years ago now, but it's still relevant. Looking at 5 of us, Rob Law, Karen Weber, Haiyan Song, Kathy Shu, and me, and we analyzed 507 reviews that we did of journal articles that came to us, of which 373 or 75% were recommended for rejection or major revisions. And for a lot of referees, a major revision is a polite way of saying rejection. So 3/4 of the manuscripts that we saw were rejected. And they weren't rejected for simple reasons, that on average, in looking at the research, there were over 6 fundamental deficiencies per paper. So a weak paper is weak all the way through. And if you can put up the next slide, Cece, you can see where the issues arise. So as I said, on average, there were 6 deficiencies per paper. And a lot of them, they had fundamental flaws. So it doesn't matter how well you dress up the paper, how well you try to improve it. There are fundamental flaws in the research design that cannot be fixed. And if there are fundamental flaws, then the paper will never, ever see the light of day, no matter how often you shop it around. And these were the issues that we found, that more than anything else, the method was the big stumbling block. And as a referee, we were looking that the method needed to be fully explained. And if it's not explained fully, then that raises questions about whether or not somebody's playing games or somebody's trying to hide something that's fundamentally missing in the method. There are terms that are not well explained. People talk about a random sample when they're really meaning a convenience sample. And if you don't know the difference between random and convenience at that basic level, then that raises questions about are you aware enough methodologically to understand the work? Sometimes people use the wrong method. I reviewed one paper where somebody said the sample was 103,000. And what they're really talking about was that there were 103,000 visitors to a specific event, but they surveyed 25 people. So the sample wasn't 103,000, the sample really was 25. Is the research instrument well explained? Have you told us what the questions are? Have you told us how you went about sampling? Have you told us what the sample size is? Has you told us what the population is? Have you told us what the limitations are? You know, a lot of people talk about a one-off sample that's done in April, and then they try to extrapolate that over the whole year. Well, that's a limitation. It's a one-off period taken at a one-off period of time, so you have to be clear with that. The other big issue that came through was, so what? And what I noticed in reading a whole lot of papers over my 36-year career now is a lot of people are very good at explaining what they do, but they don't explain why they do it, and they don't explain why it's important. And there's some topics that are done to death. So if you're looking at social impacts of tourism, there are hundreds and hundreds of papers published in social impacts of tourism. So what is it that's new? What's exciting? Where's the so what? And just adding another variable is not a so what. Just doing the same research in another location is not a so what. There's so many topics that are done to death that you really have to be quite specific. I always tell students, and I always tell other people, you know, research is all about asking and answering a question. And the questions that we have to ask are why and how. If we just ask what questions, then there's probably not a whole lot that's new in it. A couple of other points I want to talk about. One is the writing style. And more than anything else, there's no plot to the paper. There's no organization structure. There are logic gaps where you reach a certain point and then ta-da, you wave a magic wand and you come to a brilliant conclusion. There are discussions. The discussion and conclusion section often has nothing to do with the question that was asked, the data that were collected, and how the data were analyzed. And so if you're concluding something completely different to what you're writing about, the paper will never get accepted. And increasingly also we're seeing with AI that the language is very flowery, very hard to follow. It's really easy to pick an AI paper. And AI papers, again, are pretty good at describing what, but they're not very good at describing why and how. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about, you can see the rest of the items, but the last thing I want to talk about briefly is the literature review. And in this day and age, there's no excuse to not go to the original sources. Everything's available now online. Everything's available now through Google Scholar. So if you're citing somebody else who cited Dick Butler's work, then why not go to Dick Butler's work and see what he actually said? And a certain way to get rejected is to ignore key literature. And I've seen this happen over and over again, where people ignore core literature on a topic for fear that it's already been done, and so therefore the paper's not offering anything new. Well, the core literature informs the study and it informs the method. So the research then says, how do we extend our knowledge and how do we then come up with something that's a real contribution to literature? The other way to get papers rejected is just throw everything into the kitchen sink. So you've got one paper on constraints, you've got one paper on life cycle, you've got one paper on consumer behavior, you've got one paper on blah, 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 blah. And in the end, there's nothing. And the other thing with the literature review is that it has to be a critical literature review. What do we know about the topic? What don't we know about the topic? Does the literature contradict each other, which then raises a really interesting question? All of these things are certain ways to guarantee a desk rejection. Just remember, if there are an average of 6 deficiencies per paper, a weak paper is weak all the way through. And as you go through the list, you can see what we're talking about. Bad method, lack of significance, poor writing style. And bear in mind that 4 of the 5 authors on this paper were not native English speakers. So we're not talking about weak grammar, although that'll definitely get it rejected. But we're talking about a writing style that doesn't make sense. People inventing words, people writing convoluted sentences. Again, the literature review, what about the data analysis, the whole organization of the paper? There are a whole range of things that need to be addressed. And I think the other speakers will talk about these more and more over the course of this session. So with that, Cece and Dimitrios, I'll turn it back to you and let the other speakers talk. So thank you, and I'm also here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Professor McCurcher, for your overall overview of reasons why paper got rejected. Next, our panelists will dive deeper into each perspectives. So next, let's welcome our next panelist speaker, Professor Louisa Andrew, who will talk about the journal fit.
Thank you, Cece and Professor Dimitrios, and the panelists. Thank you, Bob McCarthy, because you gave a very important and overall picture about the desk rejection. And regarding the topic of the fitting of the journal, this is very important because, as Professor Buhali says, there is a high rate of desk rejections. So authors, we need to really read everything that is in the website of the journal, all the information regarding aims and scope. Also, for instance, in tourism review, there is a video introduction. And also it's interesting to see and to read the latest articles, to join the conversation with to see the melody of the journal, because this is like a competition. It's many papers and there is a high there's rejection. So as I said, we need to really focus on to first meet the journal's quality, and also a high contribution in terms of the different conceptual methodology and everything that we will discuss in this panel. So as a comparison, Emerald also provides different comparison. This is just an example of the different journals. So if you need to really, as I mentioned before, to join the conversation, to read the articles, cite the proper articles, take into account also not only the journals that you approach, but also related journals in your field. That is very important in order to have a great contribution. That is very important for the high quality journals. Please, next slide. Yeah, the editors reject manuscript because there are three main factors: wrong journal, also, sorry, wrong journal, wrong format, and also failure to follow the journal submission instructions. So we really need to have to consider the journal aims and scope. As I mentioned, there are perhaps different type of papers. We really need to consider the topics, but also the contribution. And also the wrong format, because as I mentioned, this is a competition and we need to check details that editors consider, not only the extension, but also the style of conversation, the language. So we really need to be prepared, and also to submit to conference is a good strategy. To also to ask other colleagues to read your papers, because it's very important that your paper has all the details. As we also, as authors, we submit papers and we receive sometimes the rejections, although the paper is very good, because it's as I said, we should be because there is a lot of research and we have to be very good. Then also we need to, there are also from Emerald, for instance, author checklists that we need to really be prepared with the journal submission instructions. Next slide, please. Cece, next slide. Yeah, and to finish what I want to say at the beginning, I say that it's a metaphor, because it's like imagine that your article is going to be a competition, in a musical competitions. So you really need to know the type of music, if you it's a classical music or it's jazz music. So you really need to know and to bring something new, so that we need to know the scope of the journal to avoid plagiarism. Also, attention to the details, format details, as Bob McArthur said. This is important to consider everything now with the artificial intelligence. We need to be prepared, that because also we need to consider that we need to know the standards. Maybe we will in our conversation also later we will talk about these topics, but also the importance of the structure and composition, the originality, creativity, and of course the impact and social relevance. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Andrew. So next, let's welcome our next speaker, Dr. Anna Famaki, to talk about the theoretical and practical implications of a manuscript.
Thank you, Cici. Interestingly enough, today I was thinking that the theoretical and practical implications were the section that I always hated writing. So, you know, these tips come after many rejections, and I believe I speak on behalf of a lot of people here in the panel that we have received and still receive a lot of rejections. So, you know, after a lot of reflection, I came down to this let's say, tips that I also have to remind myself when I'm writing papers. Right, so as an associate editor and as a reviewer, something that I see very frequently that authors do, they try to justify the theoretical contribution of their study by saying that no one else has researched this topic, or no one else has studied this specific angle of a construct, let's say. But this is not adequate enough. Maybe there is a reason why there are no studies on a specific topic. So the first thing that it's very important for authors to do in a paper before submitting to a journal is to ensure that they have a meaningful research gap. If it's interesting to you, it doesn't mean that it's interesting generally. So your study, your research needs to be meaningful. It needs to be interesting to a broader audience. And the research gap needs to be repeated throughout the paper. So it needs to be stated clearly in the abstract. It needs to be stated in the introduction. Your literature review needs to conclude with a specific clear research gap, and the research gap needs to be mentioned again in the conclusions, and of course in the theoretical implications, because that is where your theoretical implications and theoretical contributions discussion will build on. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it's very important to avoid overclaiming. So I see this a lot in papers where authors will basically present their study as if they have reinvented the wheel. But this is not necessarily the case if we look at the data. So when authors make let's say statements, or they discuss the theoretical contributions of their study, these need to be linked to the research gap, and these need to be supported by the data. Don't overclaim, don't overgeneralize. It's very important also to articulate the contribution clearly throughout the paper in various sections, like I mentioned before, in the abstract, in the introduction, the literature review, and of course in the conclusion. And it's also necessary, depending on the topic, to make sure that we show how our findings, how our results advance existing knowledge, what do they contribute, how do they contribute to a specific theoretical framework. So for example, if we have a study which is being done on, let's say, luxury in hotels, and we're using a specific theory, like theory of planned behavior, then we need to discuss how our findings are advancing knowledge in the luxury sector, luxury, let's say, in services, how the findings of our study advances knowledge, more specifically in hotels or in the hospitality sector, and what does it add in terms of the theory of planned behavior, okay? The other thing is that our theoretical novelty, our suggested theoretical novelty, needs to be credible. So it needs to link back to our methods, our results. We can't just make claims just for the sake of making claims and showing a theoretical contribution. Everything needs to be supported by the data, by the methodology, and needs to derive from our results. Something that Professor McKershaw also mentioned, this section, I usually like to discuss my theoretical contributions and my study's practical implications in the conclusion section. But this section needs to be used wisely. So it's not about presenting the findings once again. We have done this in the results section. We have repeated the findings in the discussion section where we cross-reference with past studies. In the theoretical contribution section, it's very important to answer why these findings, why these results are important. So this has to do with the so what question. This is extremely important, and surprisingly, it's something that as a reviewer and an editor, I see that it's missed many times in papers. Also, very important to avoid token theory. So don't just make suggestions and theoretical claims that appear forced or just for the sake of making these claims, or claims that are not substantiated. So everything needs to go back and link to the research gap, which needs to be very clear, needs to be supported by the data, and needs to have some credibility in terms of our methodology. And a last suggestion, before submitting to any journal, let's say that we have an author who wants to submit to tourism review, it's very important to go into the journal's website, read the guide for authors, of course, but also try to see, try to download relevant papers that have been published, and try to see what theoretical novelty is rewarded by the journal. How is the paper structured? How are most of the papers structured? And something that I personally do every time that I will submit to a specific journal, and that may be even after 10 rejections, it's very important. I make sure that I try to customize the paper. What does this mean? That as specific journal will have a specific, let's say, list of guidelines, how they want the references, how they want things to be phrased or structured. So it's very important that authors customize this paper before they submit to the journal. And something which is also very useful is to include references from this journal to show that the study is relevant to the scope of the journal, and that the theoretical contributions will be relevant to the theoretical agenda of the journal. And at this point, I would like to highlight SDGs, because I know that many journals are trying to relate their publications, the papers, to Sustainable Development Goals. If this is mentioned in the journal website, then it might also be useful to link the theoretical contributions to specific SDGs. Next slide, please. Thank you. Right, so practical implications, in my opinion, is a section which is difficult for academics to write, because we need to remove our academic hat and we need to put our industry hat on. So this section is specifically designed to show how industry practitioners can benefit from our study results. This is where we basically offer suggestions and recommendations to various stakeholders that relate to our research, and show that our paper has not just a theoretical value, but it also has some practical value. So the first thing to recognize is the group of stakeholders that are relevant to our study. So let's assume that we have a paper, we have a study that is focusing on the sharing economy. So in this case, our stakeholders would be destination planners who are responsible for, let's say, legal aspects, legislation, on the sharing economy. It might be the platforms, the sharing economy platforms, it might be the hosts, it might be the guests. So our practical, let's say, suggestions and contributions need to be specific in accordance to these stakeholder groups that we identify as relevant. Another tip is that authors need to avoid making generic statements. The recommendations, the practical suggestions that we make in papers need to be specific, and they need to be action-oriented. So it's not about saying managers should be aware of this and that. It's about explicitly telling to hotel managers, let's say, or destination planners what they need to do and how. So this links to the second bullet point, that we need to explain to practitioners how they can apply our suggestions. So it doesn't suffice to simply say that managers of hotels, let's say, need to reconsider their human resource strategies or their recruitment strategies. We need to tell them how they can do this. So specific tools that we can suggest, specific processes. Generally, we need to be as specific as possible. so that the practitioners are clear on not only what needs to be done, but how they can do this. Also, when we are offering practical suggestions, it's important to remember that we are dealing with destinations that may have constraints. We are dealing with organizations that may also have certain restrictions. So our suggestions need to be realistic. They need to be implemented in a real life, let's say, tourism context. And of course, we need to make provisions in our discussion of practical contributions and consider that different organizations may have different strategic orientations, different, let's say, resources, and so on. Our practical recommendations need to be evidence-based, again, similar to the theoretical contributions. They need to derive clearly from our data, from our results. And as a final suggestion, I would say to be mindful of how we write our practical recommendations, try to avoid a prescriptive tone and try to offer a more, let's say, constructive guidance, you know, in the form of, instead of saying the managers of hotels must do this and that, we can rephrase this into this type of solution that our study is recommending may help hotel managers achieve improved productivity and so on. So this is all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anna Famaki. And next, let's welcome our next speaker, Professor Nikos Koffiadis, to talk about the methodology of a manuscript.
Good. Thanks to Chen. Actually, it was very inspiring to hear Professor McArthur actually reciting this study about the major reasons why research is actually a paper can be rejected. And I would say desk rejection is always failing into what we call the elevator pitch. So if we go to the next slide, I have this simple scenario. Where, you know, imagine that you walk in an elevator, like you are trying to pitch your paper to somebody, and somebody asks you not what your paper is about, because possibly you already have an answer about it, but what kind of method do you use? This is one of the things that we very often see, especially on younger colleagues, where, you know, they treat the method as a black box and they say, "Oh, we use quantitative analysis." You have to be extremely specific and be able to answer this question in a couple of sentences, 2 or 3 sentences. And it's always very important to be able to have a kind of a way to check how this answer can be framed. This is also a kind of a way that that relates with the training that most of the younger colleagues. I think we will have a lot of young colleagues and young academics in the attending now this webinar. On the level that, do we really know the differences between methodological aspects? Do we know how to couple them with the theory? And to follow up with what Professor Farmaki actually mentioned, I have always found, as part of the training that we do for the publication in high-ranking journals, the semiotic checklist that I have on the next slide, which is a kind of an easy way to get and check. So the reason why I like that it has to do a little bit with my personal experience. You know, I'm coming from the world of software engineering, where we use automated testing for our artifacts, whatever we produce, and sometimes it's very nice to, like a pilot is going to fly an aircraft, is having a checklist before it is submitting. Do we have answers to these questions? And these 10 questions, or like 10 commandments, I would say, should be able to be answered very obviously by reading the manuscript. So before you submit the manuscript, just try to answer these 10 questions about your your research. What you are focusing. This is especially what you did and what you found and what this thing means. So this is a kind of a very, let's say, standard way to understand whether your thing actually fits also the aims and scopes of the journal, but in general the rigor of the methodology. The methodology is a very, very important thing. But apart from methodology, for all of us now that work in academia, there is another aspect which I highlight on the next slide that has to do with what we call reproducibility. And you know, for quantitative studies especially, there's a big discussion whether the facts or what you are actually providing there can be reproduced. There has been an Open Science Foundation initiative some years ago, especially on the psychological constructs and what has been published in psychology, whether this could be actually replicated. And you know, when we actually come with a study which carries some implications for theory and practice, especially for the practical aspect, we should be able to actually reproduce some results. So one of the interesting aspects of papers is that sometimes you don't need to come with something extremely new, but actually replicate or reappropriate and find that this also applies in the area. So the other thing is, and we're discussing about first submission, but this happens also in revisions. We get to see revised versions of papers with different samples, with different statistics. So when you submit a quantitative paper, you always have this table 1, which describes what your sample was and participants and so on, and you see different numbers. Sometimes you see less, sometimes you see more, and there is no rigor on informing what's going on. So you are pissing off your reviewers or even the editor, which he has to actually see Dimitris now, you know, being all the time trying to figure out what this paper is about, what kind of method was there, and so on. So even when you make some statements, you should be able to reproduce them. Now I will take it a little bit further on the next slide, and I will go not only on the first impression, but even the note that you submit, either on a revision or on a submission. So the main issue, so we can go to the next slide, Keke, on this thing, is that there is kind of statements that you see even on the letter to the editor. So when we submit the paper, sometimes we write a letter to the editor saying, oh, look, this is a paper I have. We do it with this, and this. One thing to provide some advice here is do not align yourself and preclude yourself with a statistical tool that you are using. We are not interested of whether SPSS or SAS or whatever other tool is out there that can support that. Focus on the methodology itself. You are scientists and you are supposed to use the method, you are not software users. And this actually creates a very bad impression when you actually go and describe your method and say we used SPSS and this is the SPSS result. It's not the SPSS result, it's the result of I don't know, the ordinary least squares evaluation of the dependent variable. You use those SPSS obviously to calculate that, but this is not what we're interested in. We're interested on whether you understand what this thing is out telling you and what it can be. The other thing is about robustness. And here, it has happened a couple of times with me as an editor, when you see, somebody submitting a paper and say, okay, we have done this, this, and this, and the results are available upon request. So when we requested the results, they said, oh, actually, we don't have them. So this was also another case that may backfire. So all these things can be summarized on what I have on the next slide, which is actually the 2 points that I want actually to bring back to the initial opening by Professor McKercher. Will actually put it in a very nice way, because as you saw in the statistics, the first way of the first reason for this rejection always was the methodology. So clarify the research design, look at how this the logic of your design is supporting your results, and the assumptions, of course, and the limitations, and then justify methodological choices. You are not using structural equation modeling because everybody else is using that. You are using it because you have some sort of way that you want to find a construct that is very difficult to define with a standard way. But remember here Occam's razor, and try to think that the best possible method to explain is the simplest one. So thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to hear your comments in the discussion. Back to you, Keke.
Thank you, Professor Kofiatis. So next we have our last but not least, Professor Sandra Loredo to talk about the writing quality and presentation of a manuscript.
Thank you so much, and thank you once again for the invitation to this panel. I think it's a quite very interesting panels organized by Professor Wally, so I think this is quite important to a very large audience. Well, I bring to all of you a couple of aspects that I usually see in the papers, and that I would like to highlight not to do and how to do in a different way. So, although we eventually we are not native English, but it's quite important to be precise. And this is not associated with to be native or not native English. Be precise. Do not say, a lot of studies, for instance, said that this and that perspective. Be more specific. See how many studies, or at least identify a couple of them. Be clear and concise. No, do not try to put a very large sentence that no one understands exactly what is going on there. Try to split in small sentence and very clear and straight to the point. Create a kind of a strong hook that is possible to understand and be captivated to the rest of the paper right in the introduction. Of course, you should state what is the gap, why the study is relevant, and other colleagues in this panel already mentioned, but create a kind of a storytelling in the introduction when you conduct the readers in a very clear and interesting way about what exactly is the paper and what the readers are going to see in the other sections. So it's important the flow. It's important to be constructive. It's important that the transitions between a paragraph and another paragraph be smooth and well organized. That's why it's important to read several times the paper before submit, and sometimes even put away 2-3 days and read again and organize in the way they have a really good flow and is clear for those who are going to read. Avoid typos and grammatical errors. Things that eventually need sometimes the proofreading, but things that is going to create bored in the readers that are not going to understand, and I would like to see those kind of sometimes typographic errors. So try to check everything is in correct and right way. Try to use as much as possible active voice to be more clear, concrete, and not most of the times using the in a way that is not starting with the subject, the verb, and in a sentence that is possible, very clear and going to very straight to the point of exactly what you intend to do. And of course, be very specific and give evidence and not just presenting the results with a couple of tables, and sometimes those tables not well prepared. If you don't mind to pass to the next slide, please. The next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Well, here it's also important to, of course, follow strictly the rules of the journal where we intend to publish. It's more than follow strictly the rules. It's quite important that you are somehow in love with that journal. We need to understand the structure of the papers beyond just reading the rules, the guidelines that you can see in the web page of the journal. To see how other authors that eventually even publish more in the journal are preparing the paper point by point. It's quite important to see that style and to be somehow involved with the journal through the other papers and reading other papers that are there. Not only try to pick up a couple of articles and just do the citations, eventually not reading at all those papers. No, try to be connected somehow with the journal that we decide to publish. It's also quite important, the tables and figures. Sometimes you can see that some authors just pick up the results that come directly from some software without editing, without organizing that table, that information, or even that figures that come from the software. No, it's important to put even some notes telling exactly what are the abbreviations that are being used in the figure or in the tables, and using that notes to support the readers that come to the table and do not need to go to the text again to understand what is going on in the table. So it's quite important that tables and figures are really clear and have the all material that is relevant to understand what has been displayed there in the tables and in the figures. So it's quite important to not start a sentence with also. Also is a conjunction. It's not the first word of a new sentence, and is more and more often nowadays to see a sentence started with also. No, use other terms that could introduce another topic, like in addition or moreover, another factor, but do not repeat all the time exactly the same terms. You write a sentence and you put moreover, and then you write another sentence, you put moreover and moreover. No, try to elucidate the readers what are the perspectives or what are the results that you are going to present. Saying, for instance, there are 3 main results, and then start to explain one by one in a very clear way. And the reason, the justification for presenting those points or those perspectives. Otherwise, it's become very boring, and of course, the readers are not going to follow and understand exactly what we're trying to present in your paper. So use always the same expression or the same name of each construct. For instance, avoid to sometimes, for instance, to use tourist behavior, other times client behavior. No, use exactly the same name. Otherwise, no one is going to understand if we are talking about the same concept, another concept, or for instance, using some expressions in the text, another in the figures or tables. No, everything should be combined, clear, and in order that the readers could easily understand and follow what you are trying to communicate. Of course, also the image, the graphics, should be in the way that is clear to see, not some words in a so small size no one can read the figures. If no one can read, why is there? So it's quite important to be very clear. Try to also avoid the combination of verbs like all the time has been done. So try to be more simple and clear, because do not bore so the readers, and is really more expressive what you try to explain. And of course, also ensure that each paragraph contains at least 2 sentences. This is quite important too. Sometimes you can see one paragraph with just one sentence. One sentence is not a paragraph. If it's just one sentence, maybe you don't need to start in a new line. Just to complement you with the rest of the previous paragraph. So it's quite important to check and recheck again all these kind of aspects in order to have not only, because it's quite important indeed, but not only the relevance, the gap, the justifications, the methodology well written, the results and the implications, but the way you present, the clarity when you present the paper is also something that you should not put away before you decide to submit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Loreto. So that's all from our panelists' insights. Next section, we're gonna have a couple questions that we'll ask.
Let me, before you go to the questions, let me thank our panelists, and I think they share fantastic information, and perhaps this is the most kind of well-organized panel we've done so far. So you guys, absolutely wonderful. Something came to my screen and says my submission to tourism review was rejected. Oh no, there are a lot of people who say it has been rejected. So now hopefully people understand why we desk reject. And I think several people already talked about the situation where people are submitting only contextual studies that they've been done before. I think Bob mentioned that, Nikos mentioned it, and Anna mentioned it. So it's really, I call it the village of my mother, and it's basically a lot of people who are just writing something that it has only application in a particular context. We see that a lot of this coming from China, because a lot of Chinese colleagues are doing Chinese topics. Sometimes even they send their paper in with Chinese name. Obviously, this will go to a Chinese journal. It doesn't need to come to review. The other thing I need to say is that for the first time in my 8-9 years of being editor, we are facing a major issue and a major case of plagiarism that we're probably going to go for a retraction. A lot of journals have actually experienced that. So this is not desk rejection, but it's actually rejection after it has been and the paper has been published, with a huge reputation damage to the authors and also their institution, because we will inform their vice chancellor, their president, their rector, whatever it's called, and we've got evidence of some unethical behavior. So one of the most important suggestions someone can give you is that when you think that the paper is ready, put that on the refrigerator for a couple of days, and get your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your mother, your grandmother to read it for clarity, and then clear it again. Because once it has come to my desk, and once it has been rejected, game over. And I think it's really, really important. And I've seen the survey that William put up, and most of the people who are on this call have never actually published in Tourism Review. which very interesting. And thank you for being with us, because you really need to read the journal. You need to understand what is the publications that we publish and at what level before just throwing in a piece of paper electronically. Okay, and I think that is almost 90% of the participants. Uh, uh, I cannot read the whole thing, William, but can you say what you said on the message, William?
Yes, almost 90% of participants have not submitted to tourism review before. So this is interesting.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that. And I think it's really important that before you submit, you know what you're doing. It's like driving a car. Before you get into the car, learn how to drive the car. Read the papers that we publish. Because otherwise, if you get in the car and you don't know what you're doing, you're crashing it. Okay, I'll keep quiet.
Thank you, Professor Buchalis, for your summary and point out another issue. Maybe you want to think about the ethical issues when you do the submission as well. So next, we're going through this moderated discussion section. Well, I have a couple questions for our panel, but I do also see in our question board, audience pointed out or raised a couple questions as well. So for the time, for the sake of time, I might skip some questions. So, and then let other, so just depends on how our panelists answering my question. My first question is to all the, our audience and sorry, to all our panelists and guest of honor, since you all have had some kind of the editorial role. So when you serve as an editor, and when you get a submission, what is the first thing come to your mind that you will decide that, okay, I'm going to desk reject this paper, or okay, maybe it has some value, let me send it to the reviewer. So just that one key fact, please. Professor McCritcher, you want to go first?
Sure, thank you. I have 4 simple questions that I think about. One is, do I know what I want to do? And if a person can't write an introduction in 3 paragraphs or less, they really don't know what they're writing about. The second thing is, do I understand the topic? And especially in tourism, do you actually understand how tourism works? The third thing is, do I believe my results? And oftentimes the results are incredible, as in unbelievable. And if you don't believe the results, then don't write about how fantastic they are. And then finally is, can I explain everything simply and easily? And if you can't explain it in short sentences, clear sentences, short words, then the paper's not a good paper. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who else want to go next? Please feel free to unmute yourself and talk.
I can go. Yeah. Right. So for me, when I receive a manuscript to handle, then what I want to see is whether this study is transferable. So if it's a study that has been done before, and their authors are just applying the same things basically that other researchers have done in a very small specific case study, like my grandmother's village, for instance, may find it interesting, but no one else, then I would just reject that, because it's something that has been done repeatedly, and the focus is a small very specific context, a small case study that may limit, let's say, the transferability or the value of the results.
Thank you. Professor Nichols, I think you want to say something.
Yeah, I think I'm stealing a little bit the ideas of Professor Loureiro, but I mean, I have a big passion for tables and figures. So when I receive a manuscript and I see the tables and figures to be of very, very bad quality, so people don't even care on how to properly structure a table, or the figure really looks very bad, so on, I question myself, if the tables and figures look like that, how would the text actually go? So if I could give a tip, somebody should be able to understand what the content of the paper is just by looking at the tables and figures. To me, that should be enough to understand what your paper is about. If you don't pay attention to this, you provide a very, very bad signal to the editor, to the reviewer, to whoever is going to read the paper, that since you didn't care about doing that, you didn't care about putting attention to the text. So what Professor McCarthy actually said is absolutely true, because you have to articulate your story, but to me is also the presentation of the artifacts to support your story. So to me, it's a very important thing.
Thank you. So Professor Sandra, you want to go back to Professor Nicholas point and say something?
I can go. I consider quite important introduction. The introduction and also the tables and figures. What I mean by this? Introduction, because should be in the introduction that authors should express the gap, the relevance, and expose to readers if they are aware about what they are doing or not, basically. Or if they just create introduction because the paper need to have an introduction but do not know exactly what they did in the rest of the paper. So introduction is key, but also I scroll the rest of the paper and try to see if they really care about the preparation and figures and tables. Or if it's just to put, as I said previously, the outputs without an organization about what comes from the outputs. So those are very important elements, at least for my side, to decide to go to review or not.
Thank you. And last but not least, let's listen to Professor Luisa.
Thank you. I agree with all the comments, but also I recognize the introduction, as Sandra said, but also the reference that, for instance, you are reading the introduction and you notice that there are very old references that they don't cover the key references also that is they are published in the journal or other journals. This is a sign that, together with the tables, for me is very, very important. And nowadays, also, when you check the reference and then you realize that there are some references that they don't exist, or there are some references that they are not at the end. So everything should be coherence, clarity, and everything like that we discussed before. Thank you.
Thank you all. We all thank you for all your aspects. And some of you mentioned the same thing, and like introduction, table figures, and some of you pointed out different aspects. And all, I hope the audience learned all these insights from our established scholars and editors and improve their future submission. So the next question.
If I can add a very, very small point of what Luisa said, and I know that Dimitris is dying to say that, so I'm saying that on his behalf. If you submit your paper to tourism review and you, on a topic that the journal is actually very active in publishing, and you don't find even a single paper from tourism review, it will make us think that you actually don't read the journal. So it's not that we want to increase our citation score, but there are so many papers that have been published there that are relevant. So if you don't cite even a single paper from tourism review, it makes us question, why did you select this journal? That's one of the things.
Thank you. That's a very good point, because the other thing that what I do also when I'm desk rejecting or or passing that on is I'm checking the authors. And increasingly what we see, that there are papers that are coming with 5, 6, 7 authors, and you're thinking, how the hell have they done? You've got 6, 7 authors to write 7,000 words. Increasingly also we see authors that are in many different countries, and you are thinking, how come they collaborate between 6 different countries? And in some cases, the sample and the technique and the topic is actually important. We did a collaboration with that Abe Pisam led from Florida, where we look at the robot adoption and the different opinions years ago, and we had about 7 or 8 people that were collecting data from different countries and we're looking at different things. That's perfectly okay. But quite often what you see is that you see a range of different authors that there is no reason why they're there. That, for me, is becoming a very quick desk rejection kind of thing, because you see that it is not legitimate, really. And the other thing is that you are looking to what have the authors have actually done, and why is that making a contribution, and also, is it plausible? I mean, we are targeted by a lot of people from around the world to submit papers that have not been properly developed. And now this is, Bob will share with you the increase of the number of papers that they are submitted in tourism journals. I think we've got more than 10,000 papers, Bob?
It's getting close to 14,000 a year now across our 400 journals around the world.
Wow.
Okay.
Published.
So 14,000 papers are being generated. And this is probably 3 times more than was 3 or 4 years ago. Let's face it, there's no more research that's happening. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm checking the authors, and I'm checking what have the authors published recently. And I'm doing that on Google Scholar and on ORCID and on all of those things. So if someone has done salami publishing, has published the same thing with a small variation 3 or 4 times, we are not going to publish that. Sometimes authors are sending us papers and they say, can you have a look and let me know if this is something that you will publish? Please don't do that. I've got a very hard time looking at the 1,500 papers that are coming in. I'm not going to pre-authorize any papers. You don't give yourself a favor by doing this. Okay. Do the homework, do the research properly, and then leave that to the evaluation team. But make sure that the research is actually valid. And if we've published, I mean, I just get a lot of papers now on robots and metaverse, and we've published about 10 papers on metaverse in the last 2 years. If you have not seen any of them, you are not going to do modern current research because you ignore the literature. So it's a very quick desk rejection. So some of my petty hates.
Thank you. And thank you, Professor Bojales, for your add-on to this question. Let's move on to our next question. And this is another interesting question. And I want all our guest of honor and panelists to take off your editor's hat and wear your author's hat, because I know you all are still active authors and writing papers, submitting papers. So as an author, I guess you all have got some kind of desk rejection experience. So what have you learned from this desk rejection experience and turned it into a valuable learning and successful publication later on with that same manuscript? And I guess Professor McCutcher, you're ready?
I'm ready. We've all been rejected. So don't be too upset when a paper gets rejected. But the important thing is you do the best you can when you submit the paper, but the desk reject is often a fresh set of eyes to tell you what do you need to do to go back, revise the paper, improve the paper, and then submit it to a different journal. That's such an important part. It's almost like a pre-review before you submit it to a different journal. It really frustrates me when I see the same paper being shopped to different journals and people have never considered the referee's comments. I received one paper 4 different times, submitted to 4 different journals. And in the end, I just said, here's the review from the first time the paper was submitted. The author has not addressed any of the comments that were raised. How can it proceed? And the paper then died.
And sometimes they use the same cover letter. So sometimes I get Dear Sarah or Dear Kathy, or you know, the different editors, and say I would like to submit this journal, this paper, to a different journal, and that's a quick desk rejection. Say you've submitted the wrong journal, mate. Go and find the right one that you mentioned. How many times have I been called Kathy? I don't know.
Thank you. And Professor Luisa, do you want to add on to this topic?
Yeah, 2 years ago, I received also a desk rejection because we were 4 authors, and then I realized that yeah, it could be. I was learning because when you submit, then you try to improve, and then perhaps it was we didn't submit an appendix, and perhaps it's something like that. As we know the theory, but that in that time we lose something, and perhaps also it's an opportunity to improve. Although sometimes you know that there are sometimes that the desk reject. They say it's not fit to the journal. However, sometimes if they provide, the editors provide a paragraph with something, it can help to the authors. But yes, it's true that I have received the rejection. Yes, but we publish at the end the paper. So we can.
Thank you. And Professor Sander?
Yes, I think all of us get text reject sometimes. But what is important, and here this here, is that try to see what editor said about if it's not only, it's not in the scope of the journal. Sometimes they only put things like that. It's not the scope of the journal, but other times mention a couple of other aspects that could be really key to improve the paper. And you should do that. And you should also not only change the cover letter, but also see if the reference style, the structure of the paper is connected to the new outlet, the new journal that you're going to submit. And all the time, myself or even with the students, and when we're working together and you, for some reason, receive desk reject, all the time you do this effort and not just move on to another journal. That's also my recommendations.
Thank you. Professor Nichols, you want to add on to this
Yeah,
topic?
I mean, this year I have received 3 desk rejections from. I'm not going to disclose the journals, but are journals on my target list. But what I want to say is that the desk rejection is an opportunity for the authors, not necessarily to, you know, it's not that the desk rejection is because the paper is bad. Sometimes, you know, we may target journals that are really very competitive. They receive a lot of submissions, and therefore, as Dimitri said, it will be very difficult to find reviewers for this, or to, you know, they want to protect the time of their reviewers. One of the reasons why we desk reject is also that. It might be that the paper is very borderline, but it will be very difficult to press our reviewers to go through the process. But what I want to say is that the desk rejection is also an opportunity. It's not an opportunity to, you know, it's not the end of the world that the paper was not accepted for review. And there are 2 types of submissions here that we have to think. It's like Dimitri said, you know, dear Kathy or dear whoever, is because this is a brute force approach on the submission. You just send it back. It's like a ping pong. You're just trying to hit the wall, and eventually a journal will accept this for review and maybe give you a revision. This is where most of the authors are actually putting the time to get a revision to make sure that the paper would pass. On non-opportunistic submissions, if a paper is targeted to go to a journal, sometimes desk rejection helps because you didn't spend time going through a review that would not be possible or would be useless. And the paper would be rejected anyway. If you ask the authors, they will prefer to either get a desk rejection with some comments from the editor, or wait for 6-7 months for a review to appear. Obviously, our journal is much faster, but you know, the average of the journals nowadays is around that 6 to 7 months, because it's extremely difficult to find reviewers, and this is something that is a bit of a problem across the industry at the moment.
I think there are two things that I need to emphasize with what Nico said. One is the timing of desk rejection. There are journals out there that keep your paper for about 6 months and then they'll desk reject. I think with desk reject papers with a maximum of 4 days, and that is because if we are traveling or if we are other commitments, because don't forget that the editors were full-time academics, we're teaching, we're traveling, we're doing conference, we're doing all kinds of things. And sometimes it takes 3 or 4 days to get into there. Normally in tourism review, we get about 5 to 6 submissions per day. So if I leave it for about 10 days or 5 days, I've got 25 papers to read. And that is very, very demanding. So but we are very careful to desk reject very quickly. So people do not have to wait for a long time, and especially early career researchers that they need to get PhDs and first jobs and things like that, and they depend on this. The second thing that Nikos mentioned that's quite interesting is that, and William, you can do another survey and see how many people on this call are reviewers for tourism review, because we really want you to be reviewers and share the workload, and especially all those people who are submitting to tourism review, they are expected to be reviewers of tourism review. Otherwise, we don't publish your papers.
Okay.
Thank you. And Dr. Anna, would you like to talk a little bit about your experience?
Well, we have all received desk rejections. If we're lucky enough, you know, this will come relatively quickly. So, I mean, what I always say is that, you know, a paper will find its home. It will be published somewhere in the end. So, you know, authors shouldn't be disappointed. If they believe in the paper, they should persist. But they need to make sure that they will make adjustments to the paper before they submit to a new journal. So, you know, they need to include a few references from the journal, make sure that they follow the suggested, let's say, structure, reference style, and so on. And, you know, if a paper is sitting at the editor-in-chief's, let's say, system for a few months, maybe, you know, they can send an email and bother the editor-in-chief and just ask, you know, what is happening with the status of our paper. But I think at the end of the day, it's important not to be disappointed.
Thank you very much for all your sharing, and I hope the audience get this from our guest and panelists, that even as an experienced scholar, we still also get desk reject and rejections. So do not be disappointed or upset for a long time. For a short period of time is okay, but then go ahead and do some adjustment and send it to a different journal and make sure your paper is a good fit. So for the sake of time, I'm going to pass this ground to Gary and go through the questions from the audience and see how we can answer them from the panel's view.
Sorry, Cece, can I make one more comment before you switch over to Gary? You know, increasingly, we're being told to publish in a small number of journals for various research assessment exercises, promotion exercises, etc. And one of the things that I'm finding as a reviewer increasingly is there's nothing wrong with the paper, but there's nothing exciting about the paper either. And the comment that often goes back then to the authors is the paper is publishable, but just not in this journal. This journal is too good a journal. It's got too good a reputation to publish an ordinary paper. And so it's really important for authors to realize where their research fits in the hierarchy of journals. You submit a good paper to a top tier journal that's not an exceptional paper, and it's going to get rejected. And if you lost 6 months instead of sending it to a good journal, that will probably accept it. So it's really important for the authors themselves to understand how good a paper is and whether or not it actually is good enough and novel enough to go into a top tier journal, or whether it's good enough to go into a second tier journal. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you, Professor McCurcher. Gary, I'll pass the grant to you, and if you want to bring up a couple questions from the audience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, CC. Okay, I probably have a few questions that I've collected earlier. The first question is, what is the role of the title of an article, and how should it be formulated or designed? Any takers?
I like to speak to that actually, because for me, it's really, really, really important. And actually, those who have published in Tourism Review, they know that most of the articles have changed the titles. I've suggested to the authors to change the titles, because quite often the titles are not really what the paper represents. And quite often they need fine tuning. So for me, the title is one of the most important things.
You know, I would advise everybody to take a look at Dimitrios's papers themselves, because he is the best title writer of all tourism and hospitality academics in the world. It really is his magical skill. He writes wonderful titles.
Forget the papers, right? Just read the
Well, the titles make you want to read the paper.
Exactly. It's like a menu, you know. If you don't have a menu, you're not going to eat the food. So the menu will have to tell you what is the food that you're going to eat. And quite often I get very complicated titles with 10, 12 words, and quite often I reduce them to 6, because it's really about having the elevated pitch that Nico said earlier, but really really make a very clear statement of what people would like to do.
And if I can add something, I know that we live in a digital world with tablets and so on. I find it unacceptable that before submitting the paper, you don't print it out, just see it on paper and actually feel it. This is the thing. Dimitris remembers that the first time I approached him, I had the paper in my jacket. I just said, "Here's my paper. Can you read it, please?" So that's also another thing.
And what do I say? The first time I desk reject Nico's face to face, and I said this will never be published. So
in the current form,
some feedback, and he fixed that on his flight back. So 2 days later, he sent me another paper, which eventually was published and was doing great.
But to add on what Bob said on titles, actually, if you see papers published in the 20s and the 30s, you see that they like to use 1 or 2 words. So if you go to Economic Journal, which is one of the oldest journals in economics. Actually, most of the papers there have a two-word titles on the thing, so that's also very important.
Gary, you need to manage through the questions. We've got about 10, 15 minutes and 20 questions, so go for it.
Okay, the second question is, does being a first-time author affect reviewers' decision on the paper to be accepted?
No. What do you mean first-time author?
Probably
someone who has never
first time.
published before.
Mm.
No, we just published a paper with two authors. I think one was a final year PhD student who had a fantastic topic and it had a very good. We are not looking at the authors in terms of experience. We are looking at how current the research is and how wonderful it is.
Okay. Another question. What advice would you give to researchers who would like to become reviewers for journals?
Just go to the editor that they would like to be reviewer of and volunteer.
All right. Okay. Another question. This question is related to software. Does using AI-based software such as Grammarly for sentence correction affect AI similarity in paper and create plagiarism risks?
Don't think so. Have a look on the Emerald website. It says exactly what you are allowed to use and what you are not allowed to use.
All right. Okay. That's another question is, how can we ensure that the gap we address is not only valid but also significant enough to be considered publishable?
Some of the colleagues can pick that up. Anna, Sandra.
Well, I always recommend to have a kind of systematic review. What I mean by this. Before to start a research, you have an idea about what you intend to do, but it is quite important to be aware about others are doing about the same subject before try to get some data, to analyze data, to be aware about what others are doing. Then if the gap is really different from the others, is a starting point, but is not enough, as you mentioned here before, because need to be something different. You need to prove that is different, but at the same time is something that is valid because it's interesting. It's a small gap that others do not address, but is relevant for academia, but also to the society for managers. And start to recommend, even if the table goes to the appendix, because you don't have enough space in the body of the text, that you prepare kind of a table, put other articles that are dealing with the same subject, and even an exercise for the authors, even for the authors, and try to see what you are doing that is different, but at the same time could contribute to the Turian practice. Doing that, you are aware about what others are doing, and you are more able to have an argumentation to expose the relevance of your topic, and of course also the pertinence of your gap that you are found. That's what I really recommend. Otherwise, how are you going to prove that other colleagues in the very competitive world never tried to attempt to solve that situation, that problem? How are you going to prove that this could be really relevant? Only exposing other studies that are connected with the topic, and try to analyze the difference and expose in a good way that relevance. This is my recommendation.
Okay.
If I may add to this very quickly, that it's important to, in terms of the research gap, to say how your study is important, how it is significant, to whom, but also to substantiate these claims, not just merely write a sentence that says this study is important for this and that. It needs to be substantiated, going back to what Professor Sandra said in relation to existing studies.
Okay. I'll probably move on to the next question. Regarding the alignment of the work with journals' aim and scope, particularly for viewpoints or opinion pieces, it seems to be extremely challenging as not all journals accept such papers, resulting in a lack of subject coverage. How can this be tackled?
Well, Gary, increasingly we do not publish viewpoints because, we are publishing 7% of the papers that are coming in. If you haven't done multiple studies, you haven't proven you think you are not coming to tourism review. And Bob was absolutely right to say that if you would like to publish your opinion, or you'd like to do, there are other journals that will publish this kind of thing. Don't waste your time coming to tourism review.
Okay, that's another question. I submitted my paper to several journals, and each time the response was that it did not quite fit the journal aims. I'm now unsure whether it was because I did not meet the quality criteria. Would you mention this in the test rejection if there was a fundamental problem, such as lack of methodology, for example? Thanks a lot, from Germany.
If it doesn't have methodology, please don't send it. There's no point of sending it. It's going to be desk rejected, right? But I'll tell you some of the papers that I'm rejecting in tourism review is papers that they already have a different home. A lot of very technical economics papers, I suggest that they go into the Journal of Tourism Economics, for example. So if it's something that's very, very specific and only applies either to your country or to a very specific area, then it may have a better home.
Okay.
Gary, you've got 12 minutes to go through all of the questions. Go.
Yep. Okay, there's another question. When a manuscript is rejected, can we amend it based on the reviewer's comment and then submit it to the same journal again?
It depends how badly it has been rejected. You can, in theory, but quite often, if we reject the paper, is because we don't believe that the paper can be rejected. Otherwise, we would have given major revisions.
Okay. Another question. Is it true that articles are rejected based on the subject matter? I mean, have so many articles have been submitted on a given topic that editors do not want to repeat the subject matter and therefore reject the article even though it was very good?
I don't know. Probably yes, especially if it's about sustainability and says nothing new. If there are lots of papers that have been done already and there's nothing new, you really need to do a very hard job to explain what is new, really. So, colleagues, what do you think? Bob, Tsetse, what do you think about that?
Well, this was my earlier comment that maybe there's nothing wrong with the paper, but there's nothing exciting about the paper. Yeah. And so it's not going to be published.
Yeah, exactly.
Next question. No, go ahead.
Yeah. Just to add an example of what Bob says. So if you just do a study that you replicate the technology acceptance model for online check-in, I mean, the study can be done really nice. The constructs are there. You outline what the aims and scopes are. For example, some new interface on online travel agency. Yeah, okay. There's nothing there. With a 200 participant structure equation model, that's it. There is nothing new about it. So that could be also one example of non-exciting study.
I also want to ask you to think about the journal fit, because I know tourism review, we publish high quality tourism related papers. So if it's not tourism related in terms of subject, then no matter how good quality this paper is, we may have to give you a desk rejection.
Yeah.
Okay, probably the last two questions. The first question is, can you highlight what is important not to be desk rejected?
What we've been talking about for the last 2 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, so probably the last one then. How long does it take for desk rejection of an article?
I've done the minimum one was about 6 minutes, because it happened that I was in front of the journal, the paper came in, I looked at it for all the reasons we said, it would not fly, and 6 minutes later it was desk rejected. And I think the authors were quite offended by it, but we cannot waste time. And what people need to realize is that all of us, we've got a full-time job, we're teaching, we've got our PhD students, we're traveling, we're writing. And on top of that, we're editing the journal. So you really need to be able to make valid decisions very quickly. So if it's 6 minutes, it's 6 minutes. Normally, it takes about a day or two on a normal situation. If I'm traveling a lot, sometimes they need to wait for 3 or 4 days. But guys, if we are not clearing the papers that are coming in, they are piling up. And then a week later, you've got 70, 80, 90 decisions to make. And that's a lot of reading to do. So while we're talking, I've desk rejected 2 papers. One was a Chinese paper talking about the Chinese context. There's got applicability anywhere else. And the other one was something that has been done to death. So this has happened just now. If you are on the call and you got your paper desk rejected, I'm sorry about it. Next time you'll be better.
So I think that's all for the questions.
Okay. So that's a final words.
Yeah, so I would like to have our guests and panelists to give all the audience one piece of last advice before we end this webinar. Please, Professor McKercher.
Do I understand tourism?
Thank you. Very simple and important. Sure. Go ahead, Professor Luisa.
Yeah, there are so many things that we discussed that perhaps I think we need to really be focused on the topic, to really be on the topic that we are researching, and really be convinced that we are prepared, because you lose the opportunity when you submit for this journal.
Thank you. Professor Center?
Be committed with the journal that we intend to publish. See other publications there and try to create your structure according to that. So be in love with that journal that we intend to publish. Dialogue somehow with that journal.
Thank you. Dr. Anna?
I agree with Professor Sandra. Make your paper relevant to your targeted journal. Don't just develop a list of journals and then start submitting just like this. Make sure that you work on the paper and make it relevant to the scope of the journal. Make your necessary changes and adjustments.
Thank you. And Professor Nichols?
Be self-reliant on methods. Don't expect anyone on your co-authorship team to be able to do the methods for you. You should have your own opinion and be able to execute it on your own.
Thank you. And what about Professor Gary? You want to say something?
No, nothing from my side.
Well, I'd like to add one more point, and
Sure.
that is you should be thinking about the journal you want to publish right at the start of the research process, not at the end.
Thank you.
Because then you target the journal properly. So Tete, what's your advice?
I really agree with all of our guests and panelists said. Really, I mean, study the journal is the most important. If we think of desk reject, many times it would be a journal fit thing. So you have to really study your target journal from the beginning and make sure your submission aligns with the aims and format and everything.
Okay, that's great. So last 4 minutes, basically, I would like to say that a lot of people are seeing publishing as a game. It's not a game. And it's not a speed, it's a marathon. And it's really about what contribution do we do to society and what contribution do we do to science. This is much more important than getting your paper just accepted. So it's not about writing 20 papers to see which one is going to go through. It's not like you're playing with horses. It's really about making a thoughtful contribution. The other thing a lot of people are asking me is that what is the hot topic? I said it doesn't matter what's the hot topic. What really matters is what is your contribution to society, and that is really critical. Where are you contributing, and where do you take things forward? And I think this is the most important advice: is to make sure that you are very clear on your contribution and why you are doing this research. I think we'll finish with that and say thank you very much for being with us. I can still see. A lot of people are still with us 2 hours later. I hope that you found that useful. I hope that many of you are going to come forward and you become reviewers and part of the Tourism Review family. And many of you will submit your best papers here, and many of you will address me with my name when you do so, right? Um, Thank you to our panelists for sharing their information and bringing all these wonderful ideas together. And we very much hope that you will improve your success rate when you're submitting papers. My best advice is always when you write something, put it on the refrigerator for 2 days. Get your friends, your enemies to read it and to bring back your best suggestions, and make sure that when you publish, when you submit something, it's a serious kind of research. Make sure that you've got ethical behavior, work with your colleagues, work with few people. I don't want to see papers with 6 and 7 and 8 names in Tourism Review. It's not something that I quite like to see. Thank you again to our editors. It's 2 o'clock in the morning for Bob, for Gary, and for William, who is right at the back there. This shows commitment. Thank you so much, guys. And thank you to all our associate editors who are participating, and thank you to Cheche for getting us organized with Gary and get us doing these things. Really appreciate being with you. Hopefully we'll see you soon. We will meet in Hong Kong during the Impact Conference, and then in Macau probably. It will be first time I'll meet Cheche face to face after working for how many years? 5 years. And we'll buy Bob a drink for staying until very late at night. Thank you very much, guys. Take good care. Have fun.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Thank you.